Welcome to the Daily Breaking News YouTube channel. Russia has sustained numerous serious losses in Ukraine, while the Ukrainian army's defeats continue to disgrace the world's second biggest force. Russia has at least 700 combat planes on standby before beginning its invasion of Ukraine. Russia, no doubt, hoped to acquire significant air supremacy over Ukraine with this massive fleet of jets and helicopters. However, the legendary resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces' air defense and air assault units both stopped Russia from achieving air supremacy and forced the Russian Air Force to suffer the biggest loss in its history, which continues to this day. More than 100 days have passed since the conflict in Ukraine began, and Russia has lost over 385 fighter planes and helicopters, including the Russian Ka-52 assault helicopter and Su-25 fighter aeroplane that were shot down today in Ukraine. This is an enormous amount, much beyond the capabilities of many countries' air forces. The Russian army did, in fact, unleash hundreds of cruise missiles against Ukraine, but it was also not a solution. Many cruise missiles were once again intercepted by the Ukrainian Air Defense and Air Force, and all eyes shifted to the Russian Air Force at this point. One of Russia's most trusted soldiers, and its failure, one of the most fundamental issues posed was why the Russian Air Force's efficiency in the region has reduced. So many thoughts and a terrifying question for the Russian army sprang to mind. Is Russia's Air Force terrified of flying over Ukraine? During the conflict, there was a lot of talk about Russian military aviation. Since the conflict began more than 100 days ago, the Russian Air Force has been unable to acquire air supremacy over Ukraine. Russian Air Force pilots travel in Ukrainian airspace considerably less frequently now, and we can undoubtedly infer that Russian pilots are scared to fly in Ukrainian airspace for fear of being shot down. While the number of victims grows by the day, the Russian Air Force is slipping behind. There is talk of some deep anxiety in the hearts of Russian pilots whenever Ukraine enters the fray. This is so since, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Russia lost 210 combat attack and transport planes and 175 attack and transport helicopters in Ukrainian airspace. This is a financial loss that will be difficult to pay for in a high enough quantity to cause concern among the pilots. Russia is being drawn into an unsustainable scenario in Ukraine, with significant casualties not just in the air, but also on land and at sea. The aircraft that Putin has ostentatiously put into Russian warplanes, which Russian specialists cannot finish praising, are clearly under immense strain in the region throughout this process. Even Russia's highly trusted Su-34 heavy bombers and Su-35 fighters made a failed debut in Ukraine, where they were destroyed. Back in the early days of the conflict, on February 24th, Russian jets struck Ukraine's air defense installations. However, Ukraine's key air defense systems were unaffected. As a result, the Air Force no longer supported Russian military operations within Ukraine, and Russian jets were harshly penalized whenever they neared Kiev. To strike these locations, the Russian Air Force has devised a strategy that relies on long-range missiles such as cruise missiles. As a result, Russian air action was primarily limited to deep attacks, employing air and ground-launched cruise missiles to hinder the transit of Ukrainian reinforcements and supplies. These assaults, however, had no substantial impact on the fight, and as a result, Russian stockpiles of precision-guided missiles were anticipated to be considerably reduced. This signaled the end of the Russian Air Force's shortage of cruise missiles. Russian jets were now forced to fly close to the Ukrainian air defense system with guided or unguided missiles. There are several crucial contributors to Ukraine's prosperity. First and foremost, Stinger, anti-aircraft missiles, and Ukraine's own short-range air defense systems, as well as Ukrainian Su-25 and Su-24 MiG-27s, which pursue Russian planes and cruise missiles, came to the fore. Ukraine's versatile Stunia and P-Manpad aircraft also pursued Russian aircraft in tandem with Russia's aircraft losses. The Ukrainian Air Force continues to grow in strength. Ukraine is believed to have around 200 warplanes and helicopters versus Russia, which has lost a total of 385 manned aircraft. These numbers are based on government data. At the same time, a U.S. State Department official just confirmed that Ukraine had provided additional Mi-17 combat helicopters. Despite possessing a substantially greater air force than Ukraine, Putin's hand is relatively weak in this situation. In Ukraine, the Russian army still lacks air superiority. Taking military superiority on the battlefield is seen as a crucial aspect of 20th century military theory. Not just manned aircraft attacks demonstrate Russia's failure to command the skies. Russia has fired more missiles at Ukraine than any other country has employed in a battle since World War II. Moscow, on the other hand, had little success, regardless of how many rockets it launched. Only Ukrainian civilian infrastructure was targeted, whereas the vast bulk of military objectives were ignored. In reality, Russia lost planes during these strikes, which cost far more money than the damage they caused. Ukraine's resolve was not broken by the high-level bombing assault, and Russia also failed to neutralize important targets. The Kremlin had wasted yet another round of ammunition. Furthermore, despite Zelensky's announcement that the Ukrainian army had destroyed the 200th Russian jet, all missiles fired by Russia failed to demonstrate a substantial advantage. The Kremlin responded by saying that it had destroyed 165 Ukrainian planes, which would be plausible if Ukraine didn't have roughly 3 times the number of flying fighter jets it has ever had, even though Ukraine's fighter jet inventory contains over 200 aircraft. Since then, the number of trained pilots has remained low. However, available intelligence sources imply that Western powers taught Ukrainian pilots. Another peculiar challenge for the Russian Air Force was that the biggest weapons of the Russian Air Force, particularly heavy bombers and hypersonic missile carriers, were only used a few times against Ukraine. We may argue that the motive for this is strategic, with extremely significant consequences for Russia. In other words, Russia might have continually used heavy bombers. Perhaps gaining air superiority was important, but it was not possible due to the hazards. These were economic, military, and diplomatic dangers that Russia could not afford. However, this is merely the beginning of our in-depth investigation, which we will publish in future publications. In reality, the Russian Air Force is currently operating extremely securely in the Donbass region, where Ukraine lacks a regular air defense system and continues its strikes. It uses both guided and unguided weapons to attack Ukrainian targets and civilian infrastructure, but there is a very simple explanation why this crisis is restricted to Donbass. Since turning its attention to Donbass, Russia has provided close air support to Russian ground soldiers, letting them move faster. Even if this pace is insufficient, they do not suffer a significant disadvantage in Kiev. This air assistance, however, poses a difficulty for long-range missiles, which are commonly used in the region. Increased flames resulted in collateral damage and human fatalities. This was due to Russia's indiscriminate use of long-range missiles that were unable to reach their objectives. Russian rockets only cause harm to individuals and infrastructure. Long-range artillery attacks and long-range cruise missiles, on the other hand, are considered the primary reasons for Russia's success in the region. When examined during the last several days, military specialists concluded that these missiles played a crucial part in the Russians' thwarted activities. This is the most fundamental indicator that the Air Force is inconsistent, because the Russians are making gains in the region thanks to air assistance. However, as a result of their advance, they endanger residents and infrastructure, exacerbating the region's disarray and anti-Russian sentiment. These long-range cruise missiles are similarly limited in their range. What happens when these cruise missiles run out and Russian planes have to fly into Ukraine, becoming targets for Stingers and onboard air defense systems delivered from the West? The Russian Air Force has been through this many times and has paid a high price for it. According to the most recent announcement from Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, 31,050 Russian troops were killed and over 90,000 Russian servicemen were injured. Russia also lost 13 vessels, 2,337 vehicles and fuel tanks, 95 anti-aircraft batteries, 540 tactical unmanned aerial systems, 52 special equipment platforms, 4 mobile Iskander ballistic missile systems, and 122 cruise missiles. The Russian army, which is now under duress, must foot the whole tab for these casualties. Putin is creating a lot of problems in this tough scenario. There is a Russian Union that does not trust its head and a Russian leader whose political power is under threat. This is more than just a Western perception. Opposition Russian politicians and top Russian army commanders have similar beliefs. NATO will have to let Putin, whose strong posture has earned him many opponents throughout the world, approach its frontiers. Now it appears that a large mound of iron will replace Putin's iron grip.